In NASCAR, the spotlight always shines on the driver, but behind every champion, there's a voice in the headset, a mastermind on the pit box, the crew chief. From wild innovators to relentless perfectionists, these unsung heroes shaped NASCAR's greatest dynasties. This is their story, the men who changed the game. This is Motorsport Minds, where we bring you the machines, the legends, and the moments that changed motorsport forever.
I can't see.
Leonard Wood, the pit stop pioneer. In NASCAR's early days, pit stops were almost an afterthought. Crews weren't uniformed athletes. They were mechanics pulled from the garage. Tire changes could take a minute. Refueling was slow, messy, and disorganized. But then came Leonard Wood, a soft-spoken genius from Stewart, Virginia, who would revolutionize pit road forever. Leonard was one of the famous Wood brothers, a family team that helped build NASCAR from its roots. While his brother Glenn often handled ownership and driver management, Leonard obsessed over the details, the tiny seconds that decided victory or defeat. He treated pit stops not as chaos, but as choreography. Instead of sending random mechanics over the wall, Leonard drilled his men with military precision. He assigned roles, one man on the front tires, one on the rears, one on the jack, one on fuel. Everyone had a job, everyone had a rhythm, and Leonard didn't stop there. He engineered lighter jacks that lifted cars faster. He redesigned fuel cans for quicker pours. He shaved seconds where others didn't even bother looking. The result? Pit stops that once took 45 seconds dropped to under 20, then under 15. For the first time in NASCAR history, pit road wasn't just maintenance, it was strategy. Leonard's reputation grew so large that in 1965, Ford called the Wood brothers to pit Jim Clark's Indy 500 car. NASCAR pit crews at the Indy 500? It sounded crazy, but Leonard's methods stunned the open-wheel world. Clark's crew executed stops so flawlessly, so fast, that he dominated the race, giving Ford and Clark a legendary Indy win. Suddenly, the entire racing world realized what Leonard already knew. Races aren't only won on the track, they're won on pit road. Back in NASCAR, Leonard's methods spread like wildfire. Teams began to copy his drills, his tools, his obsession with efficiency. Soon, pit stops became central to the sport, and fans started watching them as closely as the racing itself. Drivers adored him. David Pearson, one of NASCAR's greatest, often said Leonard's cars and crews gave him the edge in some of his most legendary battles. And in the stat books, the Wood brothers racked up over 100 Cup Series victories, many owed to pit road brilliance. But perhaps Leonard's greatest contribution wasn't just the stopwatch, it was professionalism. Before him, pit crews were scrappy, dirty, disorganized. Leonard put his men in matching uniforms, trained them like athletes, and instilled a sense of pride in their work. They weren't just grease monkeys, they were the difference between winning and losing. Today, when you see a NASCAR pit crew leap over the wall, hit 4 tires, dump fuel, and send a car out in 11 seconds flat, you're watching Leonard Wood's legacy. Every stop is a direct descendant of his vision. Leonard Wood never won a championship behind the wheel, but on pit road, he changed the very heartbeat of NASCAR. He proved that races can be stolen not with horsepower, but with seconds. Dale Inman, the King's mastermind. When fans think of Richard Petty, they think of the King. 7 championships, 200 career wins, the most iconic figure in NASCAR history. But behind every king, there is always a strategist. For Petty, that man was Dale Inman. Dale wasn't flashy. He didn't have Smokey Yunick's swagger or Leonard Wood's showmanship. Instead, Inman's genius was quiet, methodical, and relentless. He grew up alongside Richard Petty in Level Cross, North Carolina. The Pettys weren't just a racing family, they were the racing family. But while Richard had the charisma and the driving talent, Dale had the gift of order, preparation, and foresight. When Inman officially became crew chief for Richard in the early 1960s, NASCAR was still raw and unpredictable. Races were often survival contests. Cars broke down constantly, Strategy was guesswork, and consistency was rare. Inman changed that. He approached every race with meticulous planning. Tire wear, fuel mileage, track conditions. He studied it all. While other teams reacted, Inman anticipated. He gave Petty cars that weren't just fast, they were reliable. And in a sport where finishing races was half the battle, reliability meant victories. Together, the duo became unstoppable. From the mid-1960s through the 1970s, they stacked up wins at a pace no one could match. Inman guided Petty to 7 Daytona 500 victories and 7 championships. To this day, Dale Inman remains the only crew chief in NASCAR history to claim 8 Cup titles, 7 with Petty, and later one with Terry Labonte in 1984. But what made Inman special wasn't just the trophies. It was his ability to manage Richard Petty's aggressive, risk-taking style with steady, calculated decision-making. Petty would push the car to its limits. Inman would make sure the car had limits to push. Richard often admitted it himself. There would be no king without Dale Inman. One of their most famous moments came in the 1979 Daytona 500, the race that put NASCAR on the national map. While the world remembers the last lap fight between Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison, it was Richard Petty who cruised to victory after Inman's strategy kept him in contention all day. That win, broadcast live to millions, cemented Petty as a legend. But behind the cameras, it was Inman pulling the strings. When Dale eventually parted ways with Petty Enterprises in the early 1980s, many wondered if his magic would fade. Instead, he proved his brilliance by helping Terry Labonte secure his first championship in 1984 with Hagan Racing. By the time Inman retired, his resume was unmatched. 193 race wins, 8 championships, 5 Daytona, 550s. Numbers no crew chief had ever reached before. But ask Inman himself, and he'll downplay it. He never chased glory, never sought headlines. His pride was in preparation, in knowing that when Richard strapped into the number 43, he had everything he needed to win. Richard Petty may be the king, but Dale Inman was the kingdom's architect. The wins, the dominance, the dynasty, all built on the quiet genius of a man who never craved attention, only perfection. Waddell Wilson, the horsepower whisperer. In NASCAR, speed has always been king, but speed isn't just about the driver's right foot. It's about the heart of the car, the engine. And no crew chief understood that better than Waddell Wilson, the man who could squeeze horsepower out of steel like no one else. Born in 1939, Waddell Wilson didn't grow up dreaming of glory in the spotlight. His passion was engines. He worked his way into NASCAR in the 1960s, first as an engine builder. Quickly, his reputation spread. His motors didn't just run, they sang. By the 1970s, Waddell was both an engine genius and a crew chief, working with drivers like Bobby Allison, Cale Yarborough, and Buddy Baker. Together, they became a force on NASCAR's biggest tracks. In 1980, Buddy Baker piloted a Waddell Wilson-prepared car to victory in the Daytona 500, setting a record average speed of 177.60, 2 miles per hour, a record that still stands today. That wasn't just Buddy's foot on the pedal, that was Waddell's masterpiece under the hood. Waddell had an uncanny ability to blend power with reliability. Engines in that era were notorious for blowing under stress, most especially at super speedways. But Wilson built motors that were both brutal and bulletproof. His drivers trusted him because they knew when they lined up on Sunday, they had the horsepower to win and the durability to finish. Perhaps his crowning achievement came in 1983, when Cale Yarborough roared to a Daytona 500 victory in Wilson's car. It wasn't just a win, it was domination. Yarborough was so fast, so untouchable, that it became clear. Waddell Wilson had elevated the entire game, and he wasn't done. In 1984, Wilson guided Benny Parsons to another Daytona 500 victory. Then in 1987, he joined Hendrick Motorsports, working with legends like Tim Richmond and Neil Bonnet. Waddell Wilson was more than a crew chief. He was the horsepower whisperer, a man who could listen to an engine and know exactly what it needed. His drivers had the courage. His engines gave them the wings.